Welcome back to Just Blazor Program. Today we have another MudBlazor tutorial for you guys. This time we're going to cover MudForms. MudForms are a little bit different than EditForms, and if you look at them side by side, they might be looking, that's pretty similar, but there are some key differences here that you have to keep in mind that not even the actual, the documents will show you. So you have to kind of go out of your way to, actually play with it a little bit before you understand. But don't worry, I've done that for you so you can actually, get started with these MudForms in the way that I expect you to use them, the way I would use them, because it's all about me. So in order to get started, we need to go to MudBlazor.com and then go find the forms and input sections. I know you can't really see it from here. It's cutting off the page, but within there, you're going to find the form section, and that's where we're going to be focusing on today. All these other inputs here are pretty much self-explanatory, and you can add them to your form all you want, and it's really just a matter of what kind of data you want to pass into your form. So that's really all there is to these inputs, and once you know how to do one of them, you know how to do all of them, essentially. Maybe the file upload's a little bit different, but it's also not that complex. So we're just going to be focusing on how to do a MudForm. And before we get to the MudForm, I want to point out that they do have an EditForm support, which is pretty nice because that means that you can follow the conventions you're used to with Blazor and still use their components and keep the style that they have. And all you have to do is just, and the only thing you really have to keep in mind is how they would normally, layer up their components when it comes to that style. So following this example, it's pretty simple. That you have your card and the content, then you have whatever it is in there. And there's nothing much more to it than that. And then you just follow the normal edit form conventions that you would, including having a model and a submit button that is, that has the actual button type of submit, which is how normal edit forms will work. In this case, however, and also up here, you're gonna have an on valid submit as well. That's gonna take care of the actual submission. So those three things that I mentioned are not present here. In fact, you don't have a dedicated submit button, you don't have a dedicated model, and you don't have a dedicated submission function, essentially. So all that is basically up to you. It doesn't mean you don't have to use it, and it doesn't mean that I don't encourage you to use some edit form conventions here, because I do. You're gonna see my example soon enough. It's just that when you look at this, you might see that those very important things are missing from this MudForm, and you don't have to freak out about it. Don't worry, it's pretty simple. And I'll show you my example right now. So this is going to be my MudForm project. In this case, I'm going to show you what I did within my MudForms in order to make a decent MudForm example, and what I recommend for you to do as well. I'm going to show you the differences between MudForm and EditForm. And in this tutorial, I'm not going to go over how to install MudBlazor or how to get started from scratch. If you do not know how to do that, then I do have a video for you right there in case you want to check that out. We're just going to be starting off with a MudForm project ready to go with my code in it as well. So before we get into any of the extra stuff I've done in here, I'm just going to go over what the most important pieces of a form is. So within your form, apart from the actual structure of the form, what you want your form to do is obviously to submit data. So the important things is knowing how to submit the data, how to validate the data, and how to handle the data and how to do the bindings correctly. So in this case, you'll notice that even though before I said that MudForms do not require models, I do recommend having one. Not only because it's more consistent, it's also easier to pass this data through once you're done validating it into your API calls later on, because eventually your forms have to, you have a form for a reason. Your form is supposed to take in data and then pass it off somewhere else. And usually that's going to be going to maybe a database or going into some API call somewhere for you to work with it and then have that in data somewhere. So it's much easier to already have it as a class, as an object essentially, and you're passing in that object through to wherever it is you need it to go. So that's why I recommend if you're using MudForms, to use it the way you would use it as an edit form, having a model already ready to go. So within our MudForm, you have other properties you have to keep in mind. So the other property that's important is this @ref property. This ref is the MudForm object essentially, And that object is what you will use in order to do some of your validation methods in there. So when it comes time to actually submit, you have to do your validations some way. And one of the ways is to use this form object, which I'll show you in a moment. And these two here are just to keep track of the errors and to keep track of the actual whether or not it's validated or not. And the reason why is because in this case, their particular example has a success. This variable is being used somewhere else within the form for the register button, so that if I went to the up here, this register button is disabled until I fill out everything, and then it will enable itself once it knows that it's successful. So that's what that is for, and that's what you could use it to as well. And bind errors is actually an array of strings, which is all your errors, so that they could show it off somewhere else, which is how they have this going on. All the errors will appear on this other side, on this other mud component, essentially. And they'll just run through the error, put it through the text, the mud text, and then you'll see it on the other side. So that's how they actually keep track of these errors through this array. But that's it for the mud form. That's all you really need to know. Just know that whenever you come to your actual using values, since we are using the class, the model, we have to use the bind value method that you would use in EditForm. If not, then you wouldn't have this. You would be binding the value maybe to something else or whatever. But in this case, because we're using the model method, we're going to be binding it to the properties within the model. So within our mud text fields, and in fact, within all these input components for the mud form, there's many of them. The most important ones, apart from the bind value stuff, is whether you have it's required, whether the error for the required, you have one there, and the validation is also really important as well. So the validation is different because the validation is the actual, the data annotations that you would be using. So I have the class down here, which I basically copied and pasted from EditForm. So what's happening is that these data annotations are being written within the components themselves. And I ran some tests on this. I don't think that when it comes to some data annotations, it doesn't work. So I'll show you it with this age one. But if you want to make sure that your data annotations work or your validation works, or even if you have some custom validations, do it through the components. That's my suggestion. Because in this case, we actually have two custom validators here. So they have one as an IEnumerable and one as an actual function. So if we go down to the password strength, you see that it's, well, I guess it is a function too, but this is an IEnumerable, and what they're passing is their string, and they're testing whether or not this string matches whatever thing they added, and they're using a delegate for it. That's what this is, in case you don't know. And for password match, it's just a normal function instead. And in this case, I think the only difference is I made the string annullable to try to amend some of the null issues I was having, but that didn't help. So you can do it if you want, but it won't change anything. And this is basically another check for a different validation. So one of them is for the first password, because there's two password. In this particular example, there are two password inputs. One is your main password, the other one's going to be checking against it to see whether or not you wrote it the second time correctly. So it's one of those. In this one, I added an age one to demonstrate some of the data annotation stuff and to demonstrate like a different value essentially. You could have it as text like I have it here, or you could put it as number. In fact, if you want to make sure that your input types are the correct types, then you should use this, because they are using password, email, and whatever up here, and that's how you would do it through this input type property. And this helper text is just an easy way of having the text that's at the bottom. If you see down here, choose a strong password, that's the text, and that's how it looks like. So it does save a little bit of time when you're trying to do stuff like that. I think I think Blazor has its own version of it, but I don't remember now. But they do have all this stuff, and of course your label is there as well. So you can just call your label everything in your mud text. You don't need another thing, call it label. and then have two different components to do that. You can just do it this way. There's some radio stuff, but I'm not really gonna go over it because it's basically just the radio group, and that is just another input, and it's not that different. It's just having mud radios, and then there might be some differences in there, but you don't need this for a form. And if you do, then it's rather simple. But what you're getting at the end of the day is it's gonna be like a boolean or something. And the other thing is how you handle your submit. So in this case, where in EditForm, just hopping over real quick, you would require a button to have a button to submit, and then up here you'll have either the on submit or on valid submit or whatever. That function is going to be the thing that's actually going to trigger whatever your API call is going to be. In this case, you're going to be triggering it as a through your own function. So in this case, we have our own submit method to work with this, and that is what's actually going to trigger the actual submission of the form. But when that happens, you have to be the one to validate it. So let's go there now. So up here, that's why you need that MudForm object as a reference, so that you could get some of the, there are some functions and stuff here that you could look at, events, event handlers and whatever. In this case, the one thing you want is this validate task, essentially, so that you could revalidate your form before you submit it. And then this will do a check. In my case, I'm doing a check to see whether or not it's valid. If it's valid, it's gonna change this boolean into true, and then I'm gonna do a re-render the page essentially. And what that will do is that right now it's gonna be invisible until I submit it with a valid submission, and then you're gonna start seeing these values pop up. That's basically my way of showing that that this was valid or not. But in this case, I'm gonna run it, and then I'm going to show you something with this specific data annotations, because not all the data annotations seem to work correctly, or maybe I'm writing it wrong, I don't know. But I have a solution to this. Like, basically it's just to, if you want to make sure that your data annotations work, just write them here through the validations, but you'll see what I mean. So let's run this, and we'll check the MudForms real quick. Now you could use it, you can use their MudForms if you want to. That's encouraged, and I do encourage you to use it. If you don't like it, then you could use the EditForms and still use their components, which is also pretty nice. But I do, regardless which one you choose, try to follow the model method. Is my 2 cents on it. So we're just gonna I missed my data annotation here. I think I was doing some changes and I missed the changes. Oh no, never mind, it's fine. Alright, so that's the password. It has to be, I think, 8 characters more or less, with like every type. Ugh. Writing this over and over again. So I'm going to show you basically the happy path, as they call it, of something that works. No, what was it? 45. Perfect. So now everything's ready to go. There's no issues. If we were to remove this, you'll see that there's an error, and then this will basically disable itself. But we're just gonna rewrite it again. That's what that success boolean is doing. So if I register with this, it's gonna show me going to the form is valid, change those values to true, make the state has changed so that this shows up now. So you'll notice that basically this is just the if everything's valid or whatever. And if I mess up my password, it's gonna complain. Got the password. Okay. So we're gonna work on this age stuff, so I can show you an example of this data annotation thing not working as you expect it to work. So the model that I'm using has these data annotations, right? I just copy pasted the edit form. What I really care about is this age. So in my age, I have a range of 0 to 100 with an error message of 0 to 100 years. I also have the same age I added to the edit form version over here. And I'm going to show you what the edit form version looks like. If I were to put 1,000, that's obviously outside the range, and it's going to say 0 to 100 years. If I did it here, it says nothing. What that tells me that there is a bit of an issue here. I've seen that some of the data annotations do work, some of them don't. So in order to fix this problem for the edit forms, you do need to add it to the actual component. So in our case, I'm just gonna remove this from age. Oh no, this is the edit form one. My bad. I'm gonna go to the MudForm one, remove it from here. Now I'm not copying and pasting it. I'm copying and pasting from somewhere else. The actual attribute. So if you look at the data annotations, like this email one here, you will see that this is actually email address attribute. It's just when you have it as a data annotation, you do not need the attribute suffix. But in order to use it outside of this, you do need that attribute suffix and treat it like an object. So I'm doing new range attribute 0 to 100, and then you have your error message like this. So this is how you would write this within the validation. Now if I run it again, even though it's input text, it will work. So I go here, write 1000 again. Now it recognizes it. Also, even though I have it as input text, if I try writing this, it's gonna if I try writing a string that doesn't the string of like whatever that has no numbers or is not an actual number, it's gonna yell at me basically. So it will work in order for you to do what you need to do. If you don't want to use the input type of number, and instead you want to keep using the input type of text to keep some uniformity over your forms, like I've done that before, and then you'll know that the validation will actually work at that point. So that, then you saw when everything works, it will show up here. So that's how you would deal with your issues with validation. Moving back to the code again, within the MudForm object, we have these functions: validate, reset, and reset validation. This forces a validate, which is what we use every time we before we submit to the to an API or whatever. It's always encouraged to do a validate, obviously, to validate the validate your model. You can reset. Reset basically means it's gonna wipe everything off the form, and reset validation means that it will reset the validation, but it will keep the ball of values within it. So let's do a quick test on that. I'm just gonna, everything is just wrong. We're gonna reset the validation. When it comes to this reset number, I'm not really sure what's happening here. Because when I do that, it'll go back to normal. If I reset it, it also goes back to normal. If I try to validate it, what's happening here is that this password, I changed it. So really only this one is being validated. This one has like the only time it gets validated is when I'm actually trying to type between the two, because this is the only one I care about, is the top one. And the age is not validating because there's a 0 in here. And the only time I found an issue with it is if I try to write some number, it says non-number, and I try to reset it, it won't catch it. I'm not really sure why this happens, but if I reset it, normally or if I do a backspace, it's fine. I assume it's because of like it's not removing the string value, it's not removing the empty string or something like that, or it's not catching it. It's something to do with the binding in there. Otherwise, it all seems to work just fine. And the out of the box validation here is okay. And if you need it to be more robust, you have the ability to do it. So I do like the MudBlazor validation. I will say that it does have some issues from what I can tell. I really wish that I found out what I did here or what's going on that didn't allow the actual validation to work too well here for the H. But the solution is to add it to the actual component itself, which is all right, I guess, because that is how it was meant to work or initially, from what I could tell. It just is a bit it does kind of suck that we can't, you know, have a one-to-one when it comes to having everything in your classes and then having in your validation here within the actual MudText stuff, because it works here in the edit form. So I'm not really sure what all that is about. Maybe I did it wrong. Maybe you guys have a solution out there that could teach me as to what happened. But either way, you have a workaround for them. Well, let's hop on over to the edit form and see how Mud components work with it. So basically, all you're using is just the Mud components for the actual look and feel of the form. Everything else is essentially how you would write a normal edit form. So in that, what I mean by that is that you have your edit form as your parent component, and within that you have your model, whatever the model is going to look like, and then you have the function for the on-valid submit or the on-submit, whichever one you choose to use to actually submit, go through the submission process. You are using their validation components, so the data annotations validator and the validation summary are available to you, and you have access to them. In this case, when it comes to the actual Mud components, again, you have to follow their, you don't have to follow it, but like if you want to keep it nice and uniformed, you know, you have your whatever the upper layer component is, the mid layer, whatever it is, up until you get to the actual content. So when you finally get to here, the actual values are using the bind value event callback, and this is how your validations also look like. So this is the same thing as you would see in the normal Blazor form without MudBlazor. You'll be using this. This will allow you to show the validations like actually in line with your text. So that's just the normal Blazor way, in case we've forgotten. You still could use the properties. So their input type text is still there. You have class properties, their helper text is still there, label. So those things are still available to you. And the only other thing you have to keep in mind is the actual submit button. This one does need the button type submit in there, unless you're gonna do the submit your own submit button if you want to do it that way. However, you will not have access to the resetting of the validations like you did in the MudBlazor form. So you won't have access to validating, resetting, and reset the validations like easily. You can do that here, but you have to go through some extra steps to do that, like any other Blazor form. And basically you just have a normal edit form apart from using the MudBlazor components. There's nothing else extra in this that you get. It's just only the look and feel at that point, if you want to think of it that way. So at this point in time, I believe this is really all you need to know for MudBlazor forms. I know that when you go here, there's a little bit more to it. There's how to do a different type of validation using Fluent. So but I think if you want to see that's more of a Fluent kind of thing, is not really a Blazor thing. If you want to see that, you know, if you're interested in that, let me know. But again, not really a Blazor specific thing. All I really cared about was the edit form that you have for your projects, and then how to actually use their kind of validation. So just all the important parts you need, and you have access to all these other, and of course you have access to all of their inputs as well that you could add to the form. And it basically works the same way, that you just add them there, make sure you bind the values, and then your validation should be in line like this, or it should be within the components like that. And you should be fine if you do it that way. You have the ability to create your own custom validation. You could do it here too. You just have to create a custom data annotation. That's an ASP.NET Core stuff. So that's not really like a Blazor specific thing, but for MudBlazor, within their properties, they have their inline validation. They have their validations within the actual components. Submission, you handle it on your own. You have access to some extra functionality through their forms, and just make sure that when it's all within this MudForm, you have your reference to it so you could use it, along with keeping track of your own submit button and making sure that you handle your validations when you. And that's the basic, basic, but like that's basically MudForms in a nutshell. Those are the most important bits of it, I believe. If there's anything else I might have missed, let me know. And yeah, stay tuned for the next one. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. And if you do, please give me a like and subscribe. Maybe check out this next video here. Maybe sort of. Also, I have a free Blazor cheat sheet for you. I worked out very hard on it, and it's just basically condensing everything that Microsoft Docs would tell you that you might need for your next Blazor project.